Coffee stained her apron, her feet throbbed, and the clock read 2 a.m. Ruby didn't have the patience for men in sharp suits playing gangsters. When the city's most feared cartel boss mocked her size, he expected tears. Instead, he woke up on the linoleum staring at the ceiling tiles. The neon sign in the diner's window buzzed like a dying hornet. It cast a sickly red glow over the cracked vinyl booths and the speckled linoleum floor. Ruby leaned her hip against the counter, shifting her weight from her left foot to her right. Both ached with a dull, rhythmic throb. She was a big woman. Fat. It wasn't a word she whispered or hid from. She carried 260 pounds on a 5'5" frame, her body a landscape of thick thighs, a heavy stomach, and arms strong enough to carry trays piled high with meatloaf and thick ceramic mugs. Her size was a fact of her existence, like the scorched smell of Benny's coffee or the permanent grease trap smell of the diner. People looked at her and made assumptions. They assumed she was jolly. They assumed she was lazy. They assumed she would take their garbage with a sweet, apologetic smile. They were usually wrong. The bell above the glass door chimed, shattering the 2 a.m. quiet. Cold October air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain and exhaust. 3 men stepped through the threshold. Ruby didn't need to see the tailored Italian wool or the subtle bulges under their jackets to know what they were. The diner was 3 blocks from the warehouse district. It was neutral ground, but barely. The man in the center moved with a careless, predatory arrogance. Vincent Corretti. He had inherited his father's territory 6 months ago, and had spent every day since proving he was twice as vicious. He was lean, sharp-jawed, with eyes like dirty ice. He didn't wait to be seated. He slid into the largest corner booth, his 2 shadows flanking him, standing stiffly by the table. Ruby grabbed a damp rag and a menu. She waddled over, her thick thighs chafing under her cheap uniform skirt. She slapped the menu down on the Formica table. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice flat. No customer service lilt, just the gravelly exhaustion of a woman 10 hours into a 12-hour shift. Vincent didn't look at the menu. He looked at her. His gaze dragged up and down her frame, lingering on the broad swell of her hips and the tight, straining buttons of her blouse. It wasn't a look of desire. It was an autopsy. "Bring the pot," Vincent said. His voice was smooth, cultured, but carrying an edge of absolute authority. "And maybe a salad for yourself. You look like you're going to sink the floorboards." The 2 goons chuckled, a harsh, synchronized sound. Ruby didn't blink. She didn't flush. 20 years ago, a comment like that would have sent her crying into the walk-in freezer. Now? It barely registered over the ache in her lower back. "1 pot, black," Ruby said, turning on her heel. Vincent's eyes narrowed. He was used to fear. He thrived on it. If he insulted someone, they were supposed to cower. They were supposed to apologize. They were supposed to acknowledge the power dynamic. Ruby just walked away, her broad hips swaying with heavy, indifferent momentum. She returned a minute later with a steaming glass pot and 3 thick mugs. She poured the coffee in silence. Black liquid spilled over the lip of 1 mug, pooling on the table. She pulled her damp rag from her apron to wipe it up. "You're sloppy," Vincent noted, leaning back. "And slow. Sal must be desperate, hiring a whale to run the graveyard shift. What do you do if there's a runner?" "Roll after them." Ruby finished wiping the spill. She stood up straight, towering over him while he sat. She looked down at him. Not with anger. With profound, crushing boredom. "Are you going to order food, or just sit here reciting jokes you stole from a middle school locker room?" The diner went dead silent. Benny stopped scraping the grill. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded like a jet engine. Vincent's smile vanished. The sharp angles of his face hardened. One of his guards, a thick-necked man named Arthur, took a step forward, his hand dropping toward his waistband. Vincent held up a finger, stopping him. Vincent stood up. He slid out of the booth, stepping directly into Ruby's personal space. He was taller than her by several inches. He leaned down, his breath smelling of mint and expensive scotch. "You've got a loud mouth for someone who takes up so much space," Vincent whispered. "Think you're tough? Because you don't cry when someone calls you a fat pig?" Ruby stared at his chest. "I think you're holding up my section." Vincent's ego snapped. He reached out, his hand snapping like a viper to clamp down on her wrist. His grip was brutal, designed to grind bone and force her to her knees. He made two miscalculations. First, he assumed her soft arms meant she was weak. He didn't know she had spent the last decade hefting kegs, carrying grown men out of her brother's bar, and hauling her own substantial weight around on her feet all day. Second, he assumed she would pull away. She didn't. Ruby stepped in. She closed the distance, dropping her center of gravity. Her heavy, solid base planted firmly into the linoleum. She didn't try to break his grip. Instead, she used her free hand to grab the lapel of his $3,000 suit. She pivoted her thick hips directly into his groin area, trapped his arm against her chest, and bent forward. It wasn't a martial arts masterclass. It was pure, unadulterated physics. Mass times acceleration. Vincent was levered off the ground over her broad hip. For a fraction of a second, the city's most feared mob boss was entirely airborne. Then he hit the ground. Crack. Vincent slammed into the linoleum flat on his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs in a violent, wheezing rush. The floor literally shook. Ruby stood over him, still holding his wrist, staring down with the exact same expression she wore when taking out the trash. Chaos erupted. The sound of metal clearing leather ripped through the diner. Arthur and the other goon had their heavy semi-automatic pistols drawn, pointing directly at Ruby's broad chest. In the kitchen, Benny dropped a skillet, the metal clattering uselessly against the tiles. Ruby let go of Vincent's wrist. She didn't raise her hands. She just wiped her palms on her stained apron. Her heart was beating a little faster, a dull thud in her throat, but she didn't show it. She looked at the barrels of the guns. "You shoot me," Ruby said, her voice steady and loud in the ringing silence. "And Benny calls the cops. You really want to explain to the precinct that you clipped a waitress because your boss slipped on a wet floor?" Vincent was gasping on the floor. His eyes were wide, staring up at the water-stained acoustic tiles of the ceiling. His back felt like it had been hit by a snowplow. He rolled onto his side, coughing, holding his ribs. "Put him away," Vincent choked out. "Boss," Arthur started. "I said put the damn guns away, Arthur!" Vincent snarled, his voice cracking. The guards hesitated, then slowly holstered their weapons. Vincent pushed himself up to a sitting position. He looked at Ruby. He expected to see triumph or panic. He saw nothing but annoyance. "Are you going to pay for the coffee or what?" she asked. Vincent let out a sound. It started as a wheeze, caught in his throat, and bubbled up into a laugh. It was a genuine, chest-deep laugh that made him wince in pain. He grabbed the edge of the table and pulled himself up. He brushed the diner grit off his ruined suit pants. He looked at her, really looked at her this time. Past the bulk, past the stained apron. He saw the absolute, unshakable stone of her. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a gold money clip, and peeled off a crisp $100 bill. He dropped it on the table. "Keep the change," Vincent said, his voice quiet. He didn't posture. He didn't offer a parting threat. He just turned and walked out the door, his men trailing behind him in baffled silence. The bell chimed, the door shut. Ruby let out a long, slow breath. Her hands finally began to shake. She reached over, grabbed the $100 bill, and shoved it into her apron pocket. "Benny," she called out to the kitchen. I need a smoke break." 3 nights later, the bell chimed again. Ruby was wiping down the counter. She didn't look up immediately. When she did, she stopped mid-wipe. Vincent Corretti was standing in the doorway. He was alone. No Arthur. No tailored suit, either. He wore a dark leather jacket and a simple black t-shirt. He looked smaller without his shadows, though the danger rolling off him was just as palpable. The bruising on his jaw was faint, but visible under the harsh diner lights. He walked over to the counter and sat on one of the swiveling vinyl stools. It creaked under his weight. Ruby threw her rag into the sanitizer bucket. She walked over to him, her heavy footsteps solid and deliberate. "We're out of the meatloaf," she said. "I didn't come for meatloaf," Vincent replied. He leaned his elbows on the counter. "I came for cherry pie and coffee." Ruby turned around, grabbed a thick mug, and filled it. She cut a massive slice of pie, slid it onto a plate, and set it in front of him. She didn't offer a fork. He had to reach across the counter to grab one from the plastic bin. He ate the pie in silence. Ruby went back to rolling silverware in paper napkins. The diner was empty, except for a trucker snoring in a back booth. "My back is bruised from my shoulder blade to my tailbone," Vincent said quietly, not looking up from his plate. "I told you I was going to drop the floorboards," Ruby answered, not missing a beat. Vincent paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. A small, reluctant smile tugged at the corner of his lips. He put the fork down. "What's your name?" "Ruby." "You're a dangerous woman, Ruby." "I'm a tired woman," she corrected, slapping a rolled napkin onto the pile. "Dangerous implies I go looking for trouble. I just finish it when it sits in my section." Vincent turned his coffee mug in circles. He was 34 years old. Since he was 18, his entire life had been predicated on the illusion of invulnerability. He commanded men who killed for a living. Women threw themselves at him. Thin, sculpted, terrified women who agreed with everything he said and laughed at all his jokes. He lived in a world made of glass and smoke, and here was Ruby, a mountain of flesh and attitude, solid, real. When she hit him, it was the most honest physical contact he'd had in years. "I was out of line," Vincent said. The words tasted foreign in his mouth. He couldn't remember the last time he apologized to anyone. "The other night. What I said." Ruby stopped rolling silverware. She looked at him. Her eyes were dark, rimmed with the exhaustion of 1,000 night shifts. "Yes, you were," she said simply. She didn't say it's okay. She didn't brush it off to make him feel better. She let the weight of his guilt sit exactly where he placed it. Vincent swallowed. "I don't usually act like a cheap punk. Could have fooled me." He chuckled softly. "Fair enough." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a $50 bill, sliding it across the counter. "For the pie." Ruby picked up the bill. She walked over to the ancient brass cash register, punched in the numbers, and pulled out the change. She walked back and slapped $46 in greasy, crumpled bills onto the counter in front of him. "Pie is $4, Ruby said. "I don't want your guilt money, Corretti. If you want to tip me 20% like a normal person." Vincent stared at the crumpled ones and fives. He looked up at her, the mask of the Mafia boss slipping completely, revealing the utterly fascinated man beneath. "You don't want my money. You don't care who I am. You aren't afraid of me," Vincent murmured, tilting his head. "What exactly do you care about, Ruby?" Ruby leaned over the counter, her soft, heavy breasts pressing against the edge, her face inches from his. "I care about getting through this shift without my feet falling off," she said, her voice a low rumble. "I care about going home, taking a hot shower, and paying my rent. You play God on the streets, Vincent. In here, you're just a guy taking up space at my counter. Finish your pie." She pushed off the counter and walked away to clear the trucker's table. Vincent watched her go. He watched the heavy sway of her hips, the thick solidity of her legs. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the urge to conquer something. He felt the sudden, terrifying urge to anchor himself to it. Vincent Corretti became a Tuesday and Thursday fixture. He never brought his shadows, and he never wore the tailored Italian wool. He came in a leather jacket, sat at the furthest stool at the counter, and ordered black coffee and cherry pie. He didn't try to charm her. He didn't make grand gestures. He sat there, sipping cheap coffee, watching her work. Ruby didn't change her routine. She didn't put on extra lipstick or soften her tone. She slung hash, wiped down sticky syrup bottles, and yelled at Benny when the eggs were too runny. She let Vincent occupy space, and slowly the space he occupied stopped feeling like an intrusion and started feeling like a pillar. 3 weeks into this strange, quiet routine, Vincent walked in, carrying a heavy roll of black industrial rubber. Ruby was scraping down the griddle, the sharp smell of burnt onions stinging her eyes. She paused, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her thick forearm, and watched him drop the roll behind the counter with a heavy thud. "What is that?" she asked. "Anti-fatigue mat," Vincent said. He kicked the roll, unfurling it perfectly along the length of her section. "The ones you have back here are worn down to the concrete. No shock absorption. It's bad for your spine." Ruby stared at the thick, springy rubber. It was top of the line, the kind used in commercial meatpacking plants. "I didn't ask for a mat," Ruby said. "My guys were clearing out a warehouse. There were extras." Ruby squinted at him. She nudged the edge of the mat with her worn-out sneaker. "There's a barcode sticker on it, Corretti. It says Home Depot." Vincent didn't flinch. He just took his usual seat and slid his forearms onto the counter. "Make the coffee, Ruby." She made the coffee. When she walked back down the line, she stepped onto the new mat. The relief was instantaneous. The brutal, unforgiving bite of the concrete vanished, replaced by a firm, supportive cushion. A long, unconscious sigh escaped her lips. Vincent's eyes tracked the subtle drop of her shoulders. He noticed things about her that no one else did. He noticed how she favored her left leg when it rained. He noticed the pale, raised scar on her wrist from a deep fryer burn. He noticed the way her thick, strong waist moved when she carried a tray, not with a delicate sway, but with the rolling, unstoppable momentum of a freight train. In Vincent's world, women starved themselves to remain sharp edges and hollow cheekbones. They were ornaments, status symbols. They broke easily. Ruby couldn't be broken. She was built to carry weight. She took up space in a world that constantly told women like her to shrink. The sheer, unapologetic mass of her fascinated him. She didn't apologize for her hips, her stomach, or her appetite. She just existed, solid and immovable. "You look tired," Vincent said softly. Ruby poured his coffee. "It's 4 a.m, Vincent. Tired is my baseline. Take a break, sit down. Benny docks my pay if I sit on shift." Vincent's jaw tightened. "I'll buy the diner. Then you can sit whenever you want." He wasn't joking. Ruby looked at him, recognizing the cold, terrifying seriousness in his eyes. She set the pot down hard. "Don't," Ruby said, her voice dropping an octave. "Don't come in here and try to play savior. You buy this place. You ruin it. It becomes your property, which means I become your property. I'm not a front for your money laundering, and I'm not a pet project. I earn my paycheck. You work yourself to the bone for pennies. They're my pennies." She leaned forward, her chest pressing against the counter. "You come in here to escape your life. Don't drag your life into mine." Vincent looked at the fierce, exhausted defiance in her eyes. He reached across the counter. He didn't grab her wrist this time. He pressed his palm flat against the back of her hand. His skin was hot. "I don't want to own you, Ruby," he said. his voice a gravelly whisper. I just want to make it so your feet don't hurt. Ruby stared at his hand over hers. For the first time in 10 years, she didn't know what to say. The bell above the door chimed, shattering the moment. Trouble doesn't respect neutral ground. It only respects leverage. 2 men walked in. They weren't Vincent's men. They wore cheap leather jackets and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. Ruby recognized the type. Low-level enforcers. Hungry, stupid. They spotted Vincent at the counter. The taller one, a guy with a neck tattoo peeling down to his collar, smiled. It was a hungry, twitchy smile. Well, well, the tattooed man said, stepping into the aisle. Word on the street was you've been slipping your detail, Corretti. Playing civilian. Vincent didn't turn around. His hand slowly slid off Ruby's. He picked up his coffee mug. The tension in his back was sudden and absolute. He was a coiled spring. Walk out the door, Leo, Vincent said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth it had held 5 seconds ago. Walk out right now, and I won't have Arthur rip your jaw off your skull tomorrow. Arthur ain't here, Leo said, pulling a snub-nosed revolver from his jacket pocket. The metal gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Benny dropped a spatula in the kitchen and hit the deck. Vincent began to pivot, his muscles bracing for a rush, calculating the distance between his stool and the barrel of the gun. He knew he was going to take a bullet. The only question was where, and if he could kill Leo before he bled out. He never got the chance to move. Hey! The shout was a sonic boom. It echoed off the linoleum and rattled the glass pie cases. Leo flinched, his eyes snapping to the woman behind the counter. Ruby hadn't ducked. She hadn't screamed. She was standing exactly where she had been. But she was holding the sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun Benny kept taped under the cash register. She had it leveled, resting on her broad hip, her finger inside the trigger guard. Put that toy away before you put a hole in Benny's espresso machine, Ruby snarled. Leo blinked, thrown entirely off script. Back off, lady. This is family business. This is a diner, Ruby roared. She racked the pump action. Kachk-chuk-hey. The sound was deafening, mechanical, and utterly final. And you're standing on a floor I just mopped. If you fire that thing, I'm going to blow a hole in your chest so big the health inspector will shut us down for a week. Now get out! Leo looked at the massive, furious woman. He looked at the gaping black hole of the 12-gauge. He looked at Vincent, who was sitting perfectly still, staring at Ruby with a look of absolute, unvarnished awe. Leo swallowed hard. The math didn't add up in his favor. He lowered the revolver, took a step back, and shoved it in his pocket. This ain't over, Corretti. He turned and bolted out the door, his partner scrambling right behind him. The diner fell dead silent. The rain drummed against the front windows. Ruby slowly lowered the shotgun. She laid it carefully on the counter beside the cash register. Her hands were shaking now, violently. The adrenaline crash hit her like a physical blow. Her knees wobbled. Vincent was off his stool in a microsecond. He moved around the counter, invading her workspace. He caught her by the shoulders just as her legs gave out. I got you, Vincent breathed, pulling her heavy frame against his chest. I got you. Ruby didn't push him away. She leaned into him, letting him take her weight. She buried her face in his shoulder, gripping the leather of his jacket. She smelled gunpowder, rain, and the faint, clean scent of his skin. I hate this shift, she muttered into his coat. Vincent let out a shaky, breathless laugh. He wrapped his arms fully around her. He felt the broad expanse of her back, the thick curve of her waist. He held her tight, feeling the rapid, thumping reality of her heartbeat against his own. I'm sorry, Vincent whispered fiercely, pressing his face into her messy hair. I was stupid. I thought I could come here and just pretend. I brought them to your door. I'm leaving. I won't come back. Ruby stiffened. She pushed back, planting her feet on the new rubber mat. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket, her grip like a vice, forcing him to look at her. "Do not," she said, her voice shaking but thick with anger. "Make me out to be a victim, Vincent. Do not play the tragic martyr. Ruby, you could have been killed." "I stood my ground," she yelled, tears of frustration finally pricking the corners of her eyes. "I am not one of your fragile little glass dolls that shatters when the room gets loud. I handled it. I handled you, and I handled them." Vincent stared at her. Her face was flushed, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with an unyielding fire. She was the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. "You think you're protecting me by leaving?" Ruby demanded, giving him a hard shake. "You think taking away the 1 hour of my shift where someone actually looks at me like I'm a human being is doing me a favor?" The words hung in the air, raw and exposed. Ruby immediately clamped her mouth shut, dropping her hands from his jacket, humiliated by the confession. She turned away, staring blindly at the coffee maker. "Ruby," Vincent said softly. "Just drop it. Forget I said—" Vincent stepped up behind her. He didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back flush against his chest. He locked his hands over her stomach, holding her securely. He pressed his cheek against her shoulder. "I see you," Vincent murmured, his voice a deep rumble against her spine. "I see every inch of you, and I'm not going anywhere." He turned her around in his arms. He brought a hand up, his thumb brushing a streak of grease off her cheek. He didn't look at her with pity or gratitude. He looked at her with a ravenous, consuming hunger. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was heavy, desperate, and deeply grounding. Ruby grabbed his jacket, pulling him down, kissing him back with all the pent-up exhaustion and suppressed longing of a woman who had carried the world alone for too long. He tasted like black coffee and adrenaline. She backed him up until his hips hit the counter, pressing her weight into him, letting him feel exactly who she was. Vincent groaned, his hands dropping to her hips, squeezing the thick, soft flesh, anchoring himself entirely to her gravity. The violence of his world outside the diner vanished, drowned out by the absolute, unshakable reality of the woman in his arms. Did Ruby and Vincent's gritty, unapologetic romance pull you in? This isn't your typical Mafia fairy tale. It's heavy, real, and hits right where it matters. If you loved watching a tough-as-nails waitress bring a cartel boss to his knees, show some love, hit that like button, share this story with your friends who crave grounded romance, and subscribe to the channel for more fiercely original stories. Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below.